Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Davey Peppers, and as we continue on into the wonderful time that is October and the wonderful excuse to talk about horror movies, we've got some really fun reviews for you guys coming up. So first off, we are going to do a review of not a horror film, but something that is quite pertinent to what's going on now in the world. It's a film called Spontaneous, a sci-fi comedy drama that I mentioned in the upcoming films of October, and I'm really excited to talk about that. And then we're going to have two reviews for Vivarium and You Should Have Left, two horror or horror-adjacent films from this year that I think are really interesting to talk about. And then we're going to finish off with part 4 of 5 of the Karate Kid retrospective that I have been doing, covering 1994's The Next Karate Kid with Hilary Swank. So without further ado, let's jump in to Spontaneous. So this movie, based on the novel of the same name, is written and directed by Brian Duffield, who is probably most known for being one of the original writers of the film The Babysitter, a movie that I really hated. I know that's somewhat of a hot take, as the kids say. Am I a kid? I guess I'm the kids. I say it. The kids say it and I say it. But I guess it's a bit of a hot take. So, as exciting as the trailer and the general premise for this movie was, I was really hesitant to watch this because I was really afraid that I wasn't going to dig this. This movie stars Katherine Langford, most known for her role in 13 Reasons Why, a show that the less said about that, the better, as a high school senior who, one day, she's in class, and the girl in the seat in front of her blows up. Just spontaneously explodes, blood everywhere, it is gnarly, and it's about her starting to form a relationship with another senior played by Charlie Plummer as more and more people in their year in school start to spontaneously combust. So what starts out as a pretty, not necessarily standard, but kind of what you would expect from the trailer in a action-ish dark comedy with some weird things going on, slowly turns into a really, really powerful movie for the time that we are in. The fear and the loneliness that can happen when things happen seemingly without explanation or without reason is really, really powerful. I was shocked at how good this movie is. And over the past couple days, I've just been thinking about it more and more, and I just want to rewatch it. And I think I'll like it even more on a rewatch. While it definitely does stick to the violence and the hysteria and the general apocalyptic nature of the events of the premise, where it goes and what it does with its characters, both in the more tense and unpredictable moments, and then as the film closes out, is constantly inventive and constantly exciting. There was not a moment in this movie where I wasn't impressed to a degree. I think that the third act is really long, and I think that some of the points that the movie makes could have been shaved down a little bit, and you wouldn't have really lost anything. But the more I think about this movie, the more that gets overshadowed by just the sheer cojones of the filmmakers to make a movie like this. it's almost a shame that it's rated R, and it is quite rated R. Again, with this premise, it's hard to do a bloodless film, and I give them my ultimate respect for embracing how gross this minor epidemic is and not shying away from the fact that this is a violent movie with a lot of gore and a lot of really shocking events. So it stinks that I feel like the people that would connect with this the most, people around like the 14, 15, 16-year-old range, most of them probably aren't going to be able to see this. Although, to be fair, it is coming on VOD. It's coming on VOD the day that this episode goes up, so I guess if you're a child and your parents are cool, go see it. Honestly, maybe watch it with them. I watched this with my mother, and we both had a really good time, and we had some interesting conversations the day after, just talking about the movie and how surprising it was that it's stuck in our heads, and still even a couple of days later. Langford's performance here is fantastic. It is, I mean, if there's any justice in the world, which who's to say, this would be the breakout performance for her. I would say something similar about Charlie Plummer, except his breakout performance came 2 years ago in Lean on Pete, which is one of the finest films of the last decade, and you should all watch it. So it's not even necessarily disappointing, it's just not as much of a revelation seeing him do a pretty good job. But Langford rules the screen here. This is really, really impressive work from her, especially when the movie gets into the heavier stuff, and it is almost entirely on her shoulders as various events in the plot make her start to feel guilty. It's a mixture of survivor's remorse and conspiracy theorying that a lot of young performers are not able to pull off. Generally, most of this movie I would have advised against if I was the person in the room, just simply by virtue of these are really heady topics that are being slammed in the middle of this weird fantasy dark comedy, and you're expecting young performers to pull it off. I wasn't shocked that Charlie Plummer held his own, because we've seen really good stuff from him before, but we've never seen Langford be this good. In Love, Simon, she's fine. In Knives Out, she's fine. In 13 Reasons Why, I mean, her performance is fine. I won't dock her performance, but the show is bad and really, really harmful. But, so I don't like to think about it. But here, she shows that there is a reason that she is continually cast in things. She actually, I shouldn't say actually, because it's not that she's ever been bad per se, but I've never been stunned by her performances like I was here. This is the first movie and the first performance in general that I've seen from her that made me go, oh, this young woman is going to be a star. Like a real blooded star. I mean, more so than Charlie Plummer. Charlie Plummer is very clearly going for a more of a character actor, or a more like subdued career path, where if Langford keeps choosing weird, risky, and creative movies like this, then I cannot wait to see the sort of thing that she comes up with as a performer, and I cannot wait to see what Duffield does next. Even though I was not a fan of The Babysitter and a couple of the other films that he was a writer on, here he comes into his own. This is shocking that this movie is a debut feature. There is stuff that he does with the camera and with performing or with directing the actors and with controlling a lot of chaos that feels like a much more mature and experienced director is behind the helm. Like, and his writing as well. It's the best writing that I've ever seen from him. Even though he hasn't done a ton of work, this is leagues better than pretty much anything else he's had his name attached to at this point. Maybe he just held on to this and this was his baby and he wanted this to be as good as it was. And if so, I commend him for that. And I really commend everyone involved with this movie for being as bold as they were. Because I remember honestly, just a couple days ago, after seeing this movie, I was talking to some of my friends about it, and they were like, and I watched the trailer, and it seemed okay, I guess, and they were all pretty shocked to find out that, A, the movie is quite good, and B, that it had such an emotional effect on me. I, honestly, if the third act was a little bit shorter, well, I say a little bit, it could have lost about 15 minutes for me, but maybe that'll change on a rewatch. Maybe I'll have more of a appreciation for what it's trying to do by kind of marinating in some of its ideas that happen in the later half of the film. But outside of that, I don't have really any notable criticisms. There are moments that are, it is consistently funny. It is consistently, like, hardcore shocking, like, elicits a ton of gasps with surprising moments and coincidences that never feel cheap. It all feels like it is barreling towards the type of movie that it wants to be. And I am very, very picky about movies that use things like random chance. And while that does come with the territory of spontaneous combustion, it can't really happen on a plan because then it's not spontaneous. I let that go for this movie because every kaboom meant something to what the story was trying to do. So I could forgive the fact that none of it really had much of a setup and a payoff because it can't. And I just focused on what it was doing for the story and what it was doing to the characters. And that is a very high compliment for me as someone who really, really hates coincidence, especially past the first act in movies, where there will be films that I will completely write off solely because there are too many things that are not properly set up and just seem to happen randomly. So I hope it is clear how much I'm praising this movie because of that big barrier just being completely sidelined. This is one of the best films of 2020, and that is partially because it's very good, and it's partially because 2020 has not had a lot of great films, but in terms of movies that just make you feel a lot of things, they make you feel good, they make you feel really bad, and they kind of rectify both of those things in a exciting and original and honestly just thrilling way. It is one of like 2 or 3 movies that I watched and immediately went, I should probably watch that again. It's like this and Palm Springs, which, while I do think Palm Springs is a better film, that's great company to be in, quite frankly. It's just really, really weird. And that is one of the most exciting things that a movie can be for me. Like, even if this movie did not work, even if all of the emotional beats fell flat, even if the performances did not shine, even if the legacy of dark comedies just bore down on this movie and crushed it under its weight, it would still get props for trying something different and trying a structure and a tone that has traditionally not been terribly well explored. Because this movie's getting rave reviews, as I think it should, a lot of comparisons are being made to Heathers. And Heathers is one of my all-time favorite movies. I love the movie, I love the musical, I know all of the songs, I've seen the movie a bunch of times. And while this definitely is not at that level, I don't think it's trying to be. I think it is forging its own path, and I would really love more movies to do things like this in the teen romance genre, because it is more palpable than 90% of the playing it straight ones. Outside of like the great teen films that have come out recently, like Perks of Being a Wallflower, we've seen everything. We've seen every way that the story can be told, every metaphor, every structural thing, every twist on the formula. We know it at this point. But there is not a formula for, hey, what happens when people blow up in front of you? And that is really cool and really exciting. And I can't stop liking this movie more and more with every passing day that I think about it. And I've only been thinking about it for like 3 days since I first watched it, and I'll probably watch it again really soon. And while this is not my favorite movie of the year, this is maybe the one that I feel like I should recommend to people the most, or like in the top 3 of that, just because I am really afraid that it is going to get buried because it's a VOD release, because it's it's an R-rated teen movie, because it's got genre elements, and because it's very weird, and because, honestly, because a lot of people have a negative reaction to Katherine Langford having a starring role because of her work in 13 Reasons Why, which, while I understand, I'm not going to blame a child, or not a child, but like, I'm not going to blame a teenager for wanting to be in a Netflix show. I'm not going to do that. But I understand that impulse, and I will just say to those people, please give this a shot. Please rent it. Please watch it whenever it comes on a streaming service. Like, this is a movie that I hope will be remembered and will be seen as one of those movies that you watched when you were young, that you kind of grow up with, and that just really hits you in that spot. A movie like Heathers, a movie like Perks of Being a Wallflower, these really interesting teen movies that find new ways to talk about the anxieties of the generation that they're made in. I don't know if everyone does seem to really like this movie, but I don't know if everybody will, but if what I have said and if the premise of this movie sounds like something that excites you, that kind of lights the fire under your bones, then you have to check this out. It's not the best movie of 2020. It's not my favorite, but it is one of the most shockingly well put together movies of the year. And it is one of the great surprises of this VOD dump that we have been in for the past couple months. So Spontaneous gets 8 out of 10 stars and just a really high recommend. I think it's a crowd pleaser, and it's a crowd pleaser with a brain and with a heart, and that has a lot to say, and that is a hard line to walk. It's not all laughs, it's not all fun, I will say that right now. It deals with the fact that this is terrifying in a really real way, and that can really hit home for people in the middle of what's going on right now with just the randomness of it all. But I really think that a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this movie, and I cannot express how happy I am to be on the front lines of talking about how necessary and how weird this movie is, and how much I really hope it's going to be a big deal. And I hope that my review and my rating will be seen as far too negative. I hope people get mad at me for not loving this movie more. Which is a weird thing to say, but you know what I mean. Now, if you'll stick around after the ad break, we are going to go into reviews of Vivarium, and you should have left before finishing off with a look at the next Karate Kid. See you then.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
And welcome back. So I am, honestly, I'm not even going to try and bury the lead. So today we are going to be talking about the film Vivarium, which is available on Amazon Prime and was released earlier this year. And the reason that we are going to talk about it today is because, and this is true, I was originally planning on talking about the Netflix remake of The Boys in the Band today for the second segment of this show. I had watched the 1970 original film, and I was about to watch the new film that just released when I said, hey, this is a pretty heavy, heady drama. I am going to go ahead and knock something out that I might potentially want to talk about in a future episode. This film, Vivarium. And about 30 minutes into this movie, I said, I need to talk about this. And an hour in, I said, is this like great? And then when the film was done, I said, this is the best film of 2020 that I have seen so far, and the only 2020 film that I have given a perfect score to. Yeah, I'm not even going to front. This movie, Vivarium, is getting a 10 out of 10 stars from me. I adore this movie and basically every single frame of it, and we are going to cover why. So, Vivarium, which again is currently available on Amazon Prime, at least in the United States. I don't know about other countries, but I sure hope it's available because everyone needs to see this. I say everyone needs to see it. A lot of people really don't like this movie, but we will get to that. So the film stars Imogen Poots and Jesse Eisenberg, who last year were actually co-stars together in The Art of Self-Defense, another one of my favorite movies from that year. Well, actually, no, it was 2 years ago. My apologies. But it was one of my favorite movies from that year. And it's directed by Lorcan Finnegan. It is written by Garrett Shanley and is based on a story by Finnegan and Shanley together. And the film follows a young couple played by Imogen Poots and Jesse Eisenberg as they're like in their late 20s. They're right on the cusp of having to actually deal with being a part of the world and having to kind of decide what to do with their lives. And they really seem to love each other, so they are trying to go get a house together. Also, by the way, I was wrong. Art of Self-Defense did come out in 2019. Forgive me. But these two characters, they are getting a house together, and they go to a real estate agent, and I think this is in Ireland. And this real estate agent named Martin, who is weird, not in the way where you think that something might be inhuman, but just kind of in that way where it's like, oh, you were probably homeschooled or something, weren't you? And he says, hey, we are building this new community. It's going to be great. Homes are filling up. I can take you guys to it. Like, we want people like you. And they say, okay, fine, whatever. We will follow you into this community. And so they follow Martin into this community, and they check out a house, and then Martin is gone, and they can't leave. There are rows and rows and waves of empty, identical houses. It's very Stepford, it's very suburban, and it is surrealist. The sky is clearly a matte painting. There is some use of like old school stop motion photography used for some things. It is clear from minute one that this movie and this setting is not trying to be realistic. It is not trying to be an analog for the real world. It is not trying to feel like it could happen to you. It is trying to be surrealist, and it is trying really hard to create its own identity and its own visual logic using a lot of like older Hollywood and animation techniques, which I personally absolutely love. There's even some like German expressionist, like silent film era stuff going on near the end, and it is just mwah, 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 mwah. It's so nice. But we're not going to get to that just yet. Actually, we're not even going to get to that, some of that, because that's all in spoilers, and you should watch the movie, so I don't need to spoil it for you. So this is somewhat of a horror film. It's not a horror film in a traditional way. It is sort of an existentially terrifying movie. It takes a lot of cues from films like Eraserhead, another very surrealist movie that has a lot to deal with the pains of growing up, but specifically parenting, because the wrench in this kind of bottle film that is happening between these two lead characters as they have to deal with being seemingly trapped in a ghost town of suburban life is around every day. They get a box of food and general necessities to keep them going. But one day, the box has a baby in it. And on the box it says, "Raise him and you will be released." Oh, that is ominous. And the bulk of the movie is about these two characters finding their own ways to try and lie to themselves and be in denial about the insanity and the absurdity of their situation, while partially trying to take care of and partially trying to figure out and partially trying to destroy this thing that is in their house and is acting strange and not talking like how humans make sounds sometimes. And it just delves deeper and deeper into the impossibilities of its premise. Now, whereas a film like Eraserhead deals like really head on with the parenting ideas and the parenting motifs, Vivarium is, I feel like, a little more interested in the overall fears of domesticity and settling down and having to really figure out what you are going to do with your life than the specific anxieties of parentage, but obviously that's a very big part of what this film is trying to do. And let me tell you, there is not a moment of this movie that did not work for me. There is a lot of it that is really freaky and deeply unsettling. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of like old school Hollywood film tricks that are being used to kind of unsettle and confuse the viewer. And there are a lot of moments of it that are gut-bustingly funny. Like, consistently throughout this movie. Watching Poots and Eisenberg, because they are both really, really good at this, watching both of them be flabbergasted at what is going on in their lives can be really funny, and it helps add to the insanity and the overall experience of this story, because they react in realistic ways. Their rashness feels earned, and whenever they are subdued, it feels like it makes sense for their characters, which is such a hard thing to do when you are making a story about things that are impossible. It honestly overcomes a similar challenge to what Spontaneous does, where you have to find that line between this works for the story and the audience can suspend their disbelief to a certain degree to deal with this, to deal with the impossibilities and to deal with the fact that people aren't going to just immediately run away and call it quits, because then, you don't have a movie. The thing that I noticed a lot when looking up Vivarium is that a lot of people that I really respect do not like this movie. And a lot more people that I don't know also don't like this movie. And I can kind of see why. This is very similar to films like Charlie McDowell's The One I Love or David Mackenzie's Perfect Sense. Films that are pretty bare, two-hander relationship dramas, but with just a real big serving of genre tomfoolery shoved in the middle and mixed up in it so deeply that it has to go dark, it has to go bleak, and it has to go exceedingly strange and uncomfortable. And both The One I Love and Perfect Sense are in my list of like top films of all time. They're in my top 50. And Vivarium feels so much like watching those movies. And I understand that it's a very specific niche that really, really appeals to me, but when I look, like, the Rotten Tomatoes score, and obviously Rotten Tomatoes is not perfect, but the Rotten Tomatoes score for this movie is 72%, which is fine. I do think that's quite low for a film this clever. But the audience score is 38. Only 38% of the audience members that watched this thought it was good. Y'all, I think it does a disservice to this movie to call it a science fiction psychological horror film, which is technically correct, if only because that is the closest thing to an accurate genre description that I could think of. But it is much more a drama. It is much more a really absurdist comedy. It would have been made for the stage of like that absurdism era of theatrical if there weren't so many things that really utilized the camera and the fact that they are playing in a cinematic space so well. Like, I'm a little bit stunned to think that this movie is being seen as just another run-of-the-mill indie genre drama. Because it's not. It is exciting to watch. It's the kind of movie that, like, lights the fire under you and makes you go, oh, this is why I love these things so much. Don't get me wrong, if you are not a fan of surrealism, if you are not a fan of dialogue-heavy stories, if you are not a fan of feeling uncomfortable and feeling bad and going to some weird places with these characters, then this is not going to be for you. But it's not terribly grotesque. It's not like Possessor, which I reviewed previously. It's not gory in any way. It's not even particularly like anxiety inducing. It's just off. And it's odd. It's a little obtuse. And it's so interesting to watch. Both on a script level and also just the things that Finnegan does with the camera here are just so dizzying. I do confess, sometimes when I have to watch like a bunch of movies in a row, sometimes I do have a tendency to either get on my phone for a little bit or like work on a few other things. And every time I tried to do that with this movie, I could only look away for about 3 seconds at a time before I go, wait, no, I need to keep watching it. I need to know exactly what happens next. I need more and more and more and more. And by the time that the movie's finale hits, and by the time that it's all wrapped up, there's nothing here that is particularly like revelatory in what it is saying or in how it is saying it. And maybe I'm grading this on the 2020 curve of very few movies exist, so we gotta treasure the ones that we have, but I don't really care. This movie was an absolute treat. It was like being fed the nectar of the gods. I want to watch it over and over and over and over again. Just because I want to send a message to Amazon for getting this on Prime and saying thank you for making a movie that I like this much so easily accessible. This is not the easiest recommend that I've ever had. It is definitely a movie that is very much for me and for people with similar tastes. If you have to watch one of the movies that I talk about today, I'm going to say you should probably watch Spontaneous, but you know if these sorts of movies are for you. You know if a movie like Vivarium will speak to you, and if it doesn't, that is totally fine. You are probably more stable than I am, and I wish you the absolute best of luck with your life. Watch Spontaneous, it's good. But if this excites you, if this makes you go, oh, that's pretty interesting, I've never even heard of that, and it's sparking you, fire up Amazon Prime as soon as this episode is done and watch this movie, because even if you don't love it, even if you do not love it like I do, even if you come away from it going, how is this kid's favorite movie of the year so far? I think either way you will get something really interesting out of it, and I think that is worth the hour and a half or so that you will spend in this world with these actors, with these characters. And then also watch Spontaneous because it's also good. But we've been over that. Spontaneous is really good. Vivarium is great. It's great in a way that no other film from this year has managed to be. It is great in the way that makes you feel like a child who stumbled upon something rare and beautiful, something that your friends do not appreciate. It feels like finding buried treasure. And it's just awesome. As I mentioned at the beginning of the segment, Vivarium gets 10 out of 10 stars from me. Now, if you'll stick around, we are going to go on to a review of the Kevin Bacon and Amanda Seyfried starring You Should Have Left before finishing out today's hour with a discussion of the next Karate Kid, a part of the Karate Kid retrospective I've been doing. So stick around for that. Thank you.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are still at it. We are going to take a pretty sizable dip in quality and excitement because next we are going to talk about You Should Have Left, a Blumhouse psychological horror film starring Kevin Bacon and Amanda Seyfried that came out in June on VOD. I didn't hear a lot of people talk about it. I even missed it, and I figured I could use this time to do a proper review of it, and if any of this interests you, maybe you have something a little more traditionally spooky to help in your October viewings. So, the first time that I heard about this movie was I was watching Mrs. America on Hulu. Actually, no, I was watching Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu with my mom and brother, and this was back before everything had started to close. This was around March or April, and there was an advertisement for this movie of Kevin Bacon and Amanda Seyfried walking around this spooky, uncomfortable, like, ghost house. It's a ghost house, or a demon house, or it's some kind of spooky, if you will. And I remember my mother said something along the lines of, "Oh man, I hope Kevin Bacon's playing her father." And then they kissed, and we realized that Kevin Bacon was in fact not playing Amanda Seyfried's father, but her husband. And that was uncomfortable. So now let's talk about this movie. So, based on the novella of the same name, but from what I have seen, very loosely based off of it, Kevin Bacon stars as Theo. He is a former, investment banker, and he and his wife, Susanna, Amanda Seyfried, they're pretty notable, they're pretty wealthy. She is an actress who is really starting to be on the up and up, and that involves her doing some racier roles and some more mature pieces, including a love scene that Theo visits the set of and kind of sparks a lot of his jealousy. He clearly has a lot of insecurities about being married and having a daughter with a much younger woman, and feeling inadequate and feeling like he cannot provide for her the way that these other Hollywood young studs that she is interacting with are. And so, in an attempt to kind of heal the jealousy and help Theo get over some pretty real trauma that has been going on due to stuff that's been happening in his past and a really big and public trial that happened where his first wife passed away seemingly from an accidental overdose and drowning of some kind, where a lot of people thought that he did it. They're trying to get away from a lot of this trauma and a lot of the negativity. So they go to an Airbnb style house in the middle of Wales. And they get there, it's the two of them and their young daughter. The town is weird. People are mysterious and cryptic, and they say strange things, and they don't really give Kevin Bacon, especially, the time of day or give him any clear answers. It's your traditional Harbinger of Doom kind of stuff going on. And slowly we start to learn more about these two characters' lives and their pasts and how this house contorts time and memory and dreams and yada yada yada, gets them to face their inner demons and maybe kills them along the way. I won't tell. So this is a pretty standard sort of psychological horror film. It is about as by the books as you can get. Although that's not a necessarily terrible thing. It definitely made me appreciate it more when I thought about a similar film that tried to do something almost identical to this, movie called The Forest from, I want to say, 2016 with Natalie Dormer, and that movie is absolutely terrible and was really, really harmful and kind of offensive. So I don't want to sound like I absolutely hate You Should Have Left just because it is pretty standard stuff, pretty basic, bottom of the barrel in terms of psychological horror stuff. There are some really cool shots, much like Vivarium. It tries to use some non-Euclidean space stuff, which I always really like. The performances are passable. Bacon and Seyfried are both very good at their jobs, and they do a very passable job here. I wouldn't have expected anything less from them. But the movie just kind of does what you expect, and while there are a few interesting things that go on, the twists and the general vibes all feel pretty run-of-the-mill. And I guess it's a compliment to say that the movie has barely anything in the way of jump scares, but it's not clever or interesting enough to hold the psychological dread that much better films like Hereditary or The Babadook or It Follows or Goodnight Mommy or yada 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 or The Witch can pull off so well. So it just feels kind of empty, I would say. I honestly wish that there were more... I wish there were more dumb moments in this movie, because it is a haunted house, and I feel like there's something really missing from a haunted house movie that doesn't embrace the fact that it's a haunted house, unless you are a lot smarter and a lot better at creating a space and creating a feeling than this movie is, quite frankly. If there were more things that popped out of the walls, it would have been a dumber film, but I probably would have liked it more, quite frankly. And I think the ambition of this movie, and I think a lot of that is because it's based off of this novella that a lot of people quite liked, I think the ambition of it to be a serious horror film, but done in the middle of the Blumhouse formula, which I really like. I like what Jason Blum and his company do with these films. I think they are giving a lot of talent to up-and-coming filmmakers that want to tell different stories. I think they are great at marketing, and I think they are great at getting a return of investment. But I look at this film versus something like The Invisible Man from this year, another movie that dealt with a lot of pretty big themes and wanted to tackle this feeling of the quiet unsafeness. But what makes The Invisible Man work so well is that it gives you the jump. It gives you the shocking moments. There's the moment in the trailer for The Invisible Man, which is so good, when Elizabeth Moss throws the paint can, or she like pours the paint can out, and the paint falls on the Invisible Man, and he's right there. With all the great themes and all the great commentary that movie has, that moment absolutely rules. And I wish there had been something similar to that in this movie. It needed that camp. It needed the willingness to be a horror film. And of course, I wouldn't be saying this if I felt more affected by this movie, if I felt that it had done a better job at what it was trying to do, but unfortunately, I don't think it did very well, and I can't help but wish that my time had been spent a little jumpier and a little spookier, if you will. The movie is written and directed by David Koepp, who has had a very strange career over the past, 30 or so years. He was one of the writers on Jurassic Park. He wrote Death Becomes Her and Carlito's Way. And he also directed Mordecai with Johnny Depp, which is a terrible, terrible film. But he also made Premium Rush with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, which is a pretty good movie, all things considered. He has a weird career, and he doesn't really seem to have much of a distinct footprint in the industry, just that he pops up in a lot of very strange places, and you can never really pin him down, which on one hand is a good thing, but I think that malleability that especially made him such a sought-after screenwriter in the 90s and early 2000s, and why he works so well with Spielberg, is that he knows, as a writer, how to maneuver what he is doing into another person's style, and when he is making a film of his own, I think that a lot of the identity that is required for a film like this can start to fade away, which is a real shame, because he's clearly talented. I mean, he's been doing this for 30 years, and he's written some absolutely wonderful films. But looking at a film like this, or even a film like Premium Rush, a film that I do quite like a lot, none of it feels necessary. None of it feels as impactful as it probably should. And I think a lot of this could have been better handled by somebody else being in the director's seat. Having someone else to say, hey, here is how we take this script and these characters and these ideas and mold them into a style, mold them into something more impactful, something that has a little more of a personality to it, because You Should Have Left it doesn't really have much of a personality of its own. I was looking through reviews on Letterboxd, and of course all of the reviews are jokes about the title. You should have left this movie at home. You should have left Amanda Seyfried and went to the cabin by yourself. You should have left 30 minutes into this. You should have left the script in the garbage can, Kevin Bacon, all that stuff. Which is funny because it's a silly title that is kind of rife with these sort of pun reviews. And don't get me wrong, I had a few of my own that I was thinking up while I was watching this movie, but in comparison to a lot of films that get this sort of response, like the very pun heavy reviews, all of the ratings were like 2, 2.5, 3 stars, which is strange. Usually the puns are reserved for absolute mockery. But I think with this movie, with You Should Have Left, it gets this sort of mockery, A, because the title is really nice for it, but also just because there's not much else to say, all things considered. As much as I do like Jason Blum, and as much as I do like Blumhouse Productions, he has made some absolute stinkers. And this is nowhere near one of those. This is nowhere near The Gallows or Unfriend. Well, Unfriend is alright, actually. But it's not Truth or Dare or the Cabin Fever remake or anything insane like that. It's just there. It just happens. And it goes by so quickly. Not because it's fast-paced, not even because it's engrossing, just because it doesn't really hold your attention long enough to even be particularly boring. It just kind of exists in front of you. Your eyes glaze over, and is there. It's just there, and then it's done. And then you say, oh, I'm glad Kevin Bacon got to be in something. I like Kevin Bacon. Hey, you want to watch Footloose? And then you watch Footloose, as you should. It's just a shame that people that are this talented are not really hitting the mark. This is not a film that was lazily put together, I don't think. No film is lazily put together. Making a movie is an incredible amount of work, and anyone who makes anything is a wizard. Let that be said, and let that be very obvious, but I think that there was passion behind this film. I just wish that it translated to the screen a little bit more. I wish someone had stepped in, and I know Blum doesn't really step in because his hands are in so many pies. That's kind of why he is able to do this. I wish someone had stepped in and said, hey, David Koepp, find the core of this. Find the thing that makes this special, and find the thing that makes this movie something that has to be said. Because that's what makes the great Blumhouse films. That's what makes The Invisible Man. That's what makes Get Out. That's what makes Whiplash and Black Klansman. And I just wish that something like that had happened here. But it didn't. It's not exceptional like those films. It's not even really spooky fun like Insidious. It just happens, and then it's done. And then you think about Vivarium for 6 more hours, at least if you're me. You Should Have Left gets 5 out of 10 stars. And so that's 3 reviews from 2020 that I hope at least one of them caught your interest, and you found something that maybe could be the movie that you check out this weekend. But before we head out after the ad break, we are going to take a look at the next Karate Kid, the 1994 fourth film in the Karate Kid saga, and part 4 of 5 of the Karate Kid retrospective that I'm doing. So stick around, I'll see you then, and then I'll send you on your way, okay?
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
And to finish out my time with you all today, and thank you so much for spending so much time with me. It's wonderful, and I hope you've gotten something out of it. But to finish off, we are going to do part 4 of 5 of this Karate Kid retrospective that I've been doing, and we are going to talk about 1994's The Next Karate Kid, starring Pat Morita and Hilary Swank. It is the only one of the mainline Karate Kid films to not feature Ralph Macchio, to not be directed by John G. Avildsen, and not to be written by Robert Mark Kamek. Instead, it is directed by Christopher Kane and written by Mark W. Lee. And the plot of the film is the Karate Kid but a girl. Alright, thank you so much. This has been the GSMC. I'm kidding. So, what this movie does is forget why the first Karate Kid works. I've talked at length about that first film, and even the second one, and even to a degree, the third one is better about it than this film is, where the defining thing about it is the respect between Danny LaRusso and Mr. Miyagi, and the fact that they see each other as human beings and as equals. There isn't a lot of time for the whiny teenager trope. It is, when they have an issue, it is between people. It feels, despite the age difference and despite the maturity and experience difference, they seem to treat each other like they are intelligent people, and I think that's what makes their relationship feel so strong and was such an impactful one for so many people. So I don't understand the decision to, when trying to restart this idea, bring in a character that is so bratty and so uninterested in the type of teaching and the type of experience that Mr. Miyagi can offer, even with the connection of, oh, her grandfather fought with him in World War II, and her grandfather taught her father the karate that Miyagi taught him, and then her father taught her, and then her father died, and now she has some karate skills. But none of it feels earned. None of it feels natural. It just feels like in a sitcom when in season 6 they have another baby just to add something new to the cast so that there can be something new for people to think about, really. And I think that's the biggest issue with the next Karate Kid is it just feels so unnecessary. At least part 3, for as much of a wet blanket, or honestly more of a wet fart of a movie that was, at least it was trying to continue some of the ideas and some of the themes from the first 2 films. Here it is just so tacked on, and I do not know why Pat Morita agreed to be a part of this movie. Honestly, this is widely regarded as a terrible film, despite the fact that it was Hilary Swank's breakout performance. I mean, she did this in 1994. She didn't do Boys Don't Cry till 99, and then did $1 Million Baby in 2004, 10 years after this. And while you can start to see some of the things that make her, Hilary Swank, like one of the great American actresses that we have, we had. I mean, she hasn't been doing a lot of stuff recently, but she still is very, very good at what she does. Her performances in $1 Million Baby and Boys Don't Cry alone are like all-timers. They're so well regarded for a reason, but for as good as she is here, and she's pretty good, especially for a young performer, especially for someone in a breakout role and having to be in the shadow and aware of the shadow of the previous 3 films, she just cannot escape this script, and she cannot find anything really to do here. And the same thing can be said for Pat Morita, honestly. This movie tries to have a lot of funnier moments than the original trilogy, and while the original trilogy did have a lot of moments that were really funny, they always felt like the jokes that come in the lighthearted dramas. They never felt like comedic beats, where here this seems much more like a traditional teen film, and it feels much more like it's trying to pander, and like it is trying to appeal to a demographic that I don't understand why you would necessarily want to appeal to. Maybe they thought if it was a less mature film, then it would appeal to young women, which I don't have time to unpack that concept, but that's the only realistic option that I could think of as to why you would see a film like the first Karate Kid and say, oh, we want to do that again, but have a female Karate Kid. Cool. All right, fine. Yeah, so we're going to make it a lot dumber and make her a much worse character because women are stupid. Like, that's, like, I am sorry, but that's how it can feel for a lot of this movie, and that puts a weird taste in my mouth, and B, makes me wonder, why would you even do this in the first place if you didn't actually want to do this? I mean, I know the answer. Money. And it didn't make a lot of money. It was budgeted at $12 million. It made 15.8, so it was a flop. It did really, really poorly, and again, this is a agreed upon terrible film. Generally, it is agreed that Swank's performance is okay, but other than that, this movie has almost no redeeming qualities, and I kind of have to agree, honestly. Even Michael Ironside coming in as the Paul Kreese character of the, like, evil karate teacher who is gonna convince his students to take down the young prodigy, he's not even having fun with that, and that's Michael Ironside, who, wait, Walton Goggins is in this movie? Oh my god. I'm sorry. I have the Wikipedia for this movie open, as I do whenever I do one of these segments where I have the Wikipedia open for that film to get names right and to make sure that I'm not missing anything important. And I just saw that Walton Goggins from Justified, The Hateful Eight fame is in this movie, and I did not recognize him at all, and he plays the character of Charlie, who I do not remember. And it doesn't matter, but that was an interesting realization, and I wanted to share that with you all, because that is more exciting than talking about this movie, quite frankly. And that's the end of the mainline Karate Kid series. The fifth and final theatrical film in this world is the remake. So what can we learn about these 4 films from their such intense fall from being a cultural icon to being kind of a joke? It's a similar trajectory to something like the Superman films, where you have the first film and you have the second film where people are all in. People love Superman 1 and 2, and people love the first Karate Kid. And then you have the less good one, Superman 3, Karate Kid 2. And then you have the really terrible one, Superman 4, Quest for Peace, and Karate Kid Part 3. And then you have the pandering girl one, Supergirl and the next Karate Kid. And both of them would be remade and brought back, and I guess that's currently happening with Superman Returns and the Karate Kid remake, and this current interpretation of the Superman character in the DC Extended Universe, and this kind of re-envisionment of the original characters with the television show Cobra Kai. And obviously Superman has a much richer and more varied history than the Karate Kid films, but it was an interesting comparison that has just been sticking around in my mind, and I don't really know why. But I think there is a lot to be learned from a film like The Next Karate Kid. And I think the important thing to learn is that this is not how you write... this is not how you write young people. This is not how you write young women, especially. And there are better ways to tell a story than to just say, just make one for the ladies, so that they can all have a little bit too. I don't know why I'm still trying to do the New Jersey accent. If you have heard in the past episodes, I think every single segment I try and do in New Jersey, and I never can get it right because I'm not good at accents, but that's not going to stop me. Because no one has asked me to stop, and if they do, I'm sure that I will because I am a pushover. But that's not the point. The point is that this movie doesn't even really inspire ire or disappointment the way that the Karate Kid Part 3 did. It just kind of inspires a resignation, just an acceptance that this is happening. Because it's not even interesting that it's bad anymore. It's just bad, and that's it. Which is so heart-wrenching, quite frankly. I hate watching a movie like this where I go, okay, that was terrible. But I don't even care that it was terrible. It just happened, and it's already moving on. At least I can thank the Karate Kid Part 3 for being bad in a way that made me care about it. Because I like caring about movies. I like having stuff to say about these films, because that is what this is all about. That's why I'm doing this show. That's why I love talking about movies, and that's why I love watching them. But there is just nothing here to sink your teeth into. And I am just bummed as all hell, quite frankly. Thank you so much for tuning into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Davey Peppers, or I have been your host, Davey Peppers, because it's the end of the show. As always, if you could leave a review, that really, really helps us out. We appreciate it so much. And also, if you could take some time and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, that also helps out the show a ton. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.